listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us share part of your day. My name is Sherry Mitchell. Myra's sitting here beside me.
Hi, everyone.
Dancing-
Glad you could be with us today.
Dancing to the music as usual. You're in an awful good mood this morning.
Try.
You try. For those who don't know, Hanukkah began last night, and so as that part of the believing world celebrates, we kind of celebrate along with them. Before we get into that, and we're going to look at this quite a bit today, let me remind you, visit the website. There's some neat stuff going on there. For all the new folks who don't quite know what we're all about, that's a good way to explain this. Learning to live the way that our Creator designed us to live. That is what we're trying to accomplish here. There's a couple of books out there. I know people give gifts this time of year, and books make a great gift. So, don't forget God's Universe, God's Rules, and Tradition to Truth. They're there. And if you are so inclined, you like what you hear here, be kind to us. Hit those likes and hit the share buttons and all those good things. Give us all the good stuff. If you really want to be notified, you can hit the bell, but I know what that's like, and it does pile up your phone front. So that's up to you. We try to put out enough notifications so that nobody forgets us. Hanukkah began last night. People around the world were lighting their Hanukkahs, which is different than a menorah. Hanukkah has 8 branches plus the shamash. The menorah has altogether 7 branches. The menorah is a replication of what was told to Moses to have them build, so it would be in the tabernacle. The Hanukkah eventually became to look similar to that. Originally, they were just lamps like anything else. If you look at a first century oil lamp, you're going to get a pretty good indication of what they lit years ago. But I will say this. When the temple was rededicated, when we get to that on Thursday night, it was not the 8-branch Hanukkah that you see. It was the 7-branch temple menorah that was lit. Okay? Just saying. So, let's look at some of these things we're getting into as people look at Hanukkah. The problem, I like to dig for truth, right? And the problem with the way we celebrate Hanukkah today is the real miracles that led to the victory that they've just been lost. Well, they've not really been lost. They've been forgotten. They are there. They're available. We can read about them in the Maccabees and in parts of Josephus. But for the most part, they're forgotten. And they shouldn't be forgotten. But they have been replaced by a miracle that probably didn't happen. And of course, that is the miracle of the oil. And, the first mention of that in any Jewish writing or any Hebraic writing didn't happen, it didn't show up until after 70 AD or 70 CE, whatever date you choose. The first mention of the oil lasting 8 days didn't happen until... Now, think about this. Of course, it was after the destruction of the temple, and after the Jewish believers began to separate themselves from the rules imposed by the Pharisees and began to live once again according to the instructions that they received through Moses. those were the very first people who were following the teachings of Yeshua, the teachings of Jesus. The very first ones, yes, they were Jewish. And all they did to make the Pharisees and the Sadducees very angry and very upset was they simply abandoned all of the man-made rules and began once again to live the way their Creator designed them to live, according to the instructions that we have been given at Mount Sinai and through Moses. We need to remember that. So all of the Christians today who are out there saying, "Oh, well, that's for those Jewish folks," you might want to rethink what you are thinking. You see, the rabbis at that time, 2,000 years ago, needed something to distract the people from the real miracles of Hanukkah, because the real miracles of Hanukkah, and there were many, are all a result of being faithful to the law and to the covenant. Now, Myra's going to read from 1 Maccabees 2:15 through 28, and you'll see what I just said, what I said.
Then the king's officers who were enforcing the apostasy came to the city of Moedim to make them offer sacrifice. Many from Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were assembled. Then the king's officers spoke to Mattathias as follows: "You are a leader, honored and great in this city, and supported by sons and brothers. Now be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the Gentiles and the men of Judah and those that are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts." But Mattathias answered and said in a loud voice, "Even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him and have chosen to do his commands, departing each one from the religion of his fathers, yet I and my sons and my brothers will live by the covenant and our fathers. Far be it from us to desert the laws and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand, to the left." When he had finished speaking these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice upon the altar in Moedim, according to the king's command. When Mattathias saw it, he burned with zeal, and his heart was stirred. He gave vent to righteous anger. He ran and killed him upon the altar. At the same time, he killed the king's officer who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he burned with zeal for the law, as Phinehas did against Zimri and the son of Salu. Then Mattathias called out in the city with a loud voice, saying, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and support the covenant come out with me." And he and his sons fled into the hills and left all that they had in the city.
So, that was the beginning of what's known as the Maccabean Rebellion. The men that followed Mattathias were very few. They were overwhelmingly outnumbered by the Greek army. Bear that in mind. The numbers never really mattered much to our Creator, though. I've talked before about God math. He really lets math be our worry, because he can do whatever he wants. Think about this. Throughout history, as long as there was at least one righteous person, that's all he ever needed to defeat evil. Mattathias didn't say that we were fighting for God. He didn't say that God's on our side. He didn't say we're fighting for our land. He didn't say we're fighting for our freedom. His battle cry was simple. His battle cry was, everybody who is zealous for the law and for the covenant. The things that we read about in the first 5 books of the Bible. From creation in Genesis to entering the land at the end of Deuteronomy. What Maccabees was actually saying was, if you care about the sacred word of the Almighty, the sacred word of our Creator, and you're willing to defend it just like David did when he stood against Goliath, you come with me. Remember, David didn't fight Goliath because he was challenging the army. Right? David didn't fight Goliath because he was just standing out there in the way. David fought Goliath because he was blaspheming. He was speaking against the Creator. And because David took that to heart and knew that Goliath was challenging the God of Abraham, he was able to go down and defeat Goliath. The Greek king Antiochus was challenging the Creator as well. He wanted a sacrifice to be made to him on an altar meant to be used only for giving gifts to our Creator. What Maccabees did was not murder. Not at that point. The killing of those 2 people was just as equally justified as when David killed Goliath. Now let's look at the reason some of the miracles were able to be realized. And here, we need to really pay attention. Because if you don't pay attention to what's in the Maccabees, which is currently only offered in the Apocrypha, it's in some doctrines Bibles still, but it has been removed. You've actually got to go find it in most cases. The miracles that surrounded this are many, and they have good reason. It was shortly after this that Maccabees died, and his son Judas began to lead the rest of the rebellion. Now, Judas is the one that they called the Hammer. Okay, and in 1 Maccabees 3:56, he made this proclamation. He said to anyone who was standing in his army, he said to those who were building houses, or were betrothed, or were planting vineyards, or were faint-hearted, they were cowardly, that each should return to his home according to the law. Now, what law is he referring to? It comes from Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5 through 9, if you want to read that for us.
The officers should say to the army, has anyone built a house but not given it to God? He may go home. He might die in battle. Then someone else would get to give his house to God. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? He may go home. He might die in battle. Then someone else would enjoy his vineyard. Is any man engaged to a woman and not yet married to her? He may go home. He might die in battle. Then someone else would marry her. Then the officers should also say, is anyone here afraid? Has anyone lost his courage? He may go home. Then he will not cause others to lose their courage too. When the officers finish speaking to the army, they should appoint commanders to lead it.
Now, at a time when this little kind of ragtag army was outnumbered about 10 or 12 to 1. Think about that. They were so outnumbered. If we were just going by our own strength, each member of the Israeli army at this point would have to kill 10 Greek soldiers just to even it out. Okay? At a time when all this was going on, Judas trusted the Almighty enough that he was willing to completely trust the instructions that he read in the Torah, in the books of Moses. You know, has anybody built a new house and hasn't dedicated it to the Almighty? And yes, that is still a real thing. We still do that. Did it not too long ago for somebody. Or I should say with someone. You know, if you're building a house, you can't be part of this war. If you are betrothed and not yet married, okay, you go home. You don't get to fight. You've got other duties to take care of. Primarily, starting a family. That's a good way to say that, right? Okay. The other thing, you know, are you a farmer who has not yet harvested? Go home, get everything in line so that people that work for you know what's going on. Because if you haven't gotten that first harvest, somebody else might take over and not be as proficient as you are. Each one of these things has a reason. Now, this one says, has anyone lost their courage? Let's be honest here. Is anybody here a coward? Is anybody here too afraid to fight? Because if you are, you're going to get in the way. You're going to get in the way. At a time when they were outnumbered, Judas trusted the Almighty enough to follow his instructions, and he sent home anybody who may have even had, you know, they might not have been in the forefront of the battle. They might have just been in a support system. He said, nope, you go home. And for that faithfulness, because they followed the instructions, they were living the way the Almighty designed them to live, their reward was very, very great. Now, as Myra struggles with these Greek names, we're going to let her read 1 Maccabees 4, 1 through 25.
Now
Georgius
took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and his division moved out by night to fall upon the camp of the Jews and attack them suddenly. Men from the citadel were his guides, but Judas heard of it, and he and his mighty men moved out to attack the king's force in Emmaus, while the division was still absent from the camp. When Georgius entered the camp of Judas by night, he found no one there. So he looked for them in the hills, because he said, "These men are fleeing from us." At daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men, but they did not have armor and swords such as they desired. And they saw the camp of the Gentiles strong and fortified, with cavalry round about it, and these men were trained in war. But Judas said to the men who were with him, "Do not fear their numbers, or be afraid when they charge. Remember how our fathers were saved at the Red Sea when Pharaoh and his forces pursued them. And now let us cry to heaven to see whether he will favor us and remember his covenant with our fathers and crush his army before us today. Then all the Gentiles will know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel." When the foreigners looked up and saw them coming against them, they went forth from their camp to battle. Then the men with Judas blew their trumpets and engaged in battle. The Gentiles were crushed and fled into the plain, and all those in the rear fell by the sword. They pursued them to Gazara and to the plains of Idumea and to Azotus and Jaminia, and 3,000 of them fell. Then Judas and his force turned back from pursuing them, and he said to the people, "Do not be greedy for plunder, for there is battle before us. Gorgias and his force were near us in the hills. But stand now against our enemies and fight them, and afterwards seize the plunder boldly." Just as Judas was finished his speech, a detachment appeared coming out of the hills. They saw that their army had been put to flight, and that the Jews were burning the camp, for the smoke that was seen showed what had happened. When they perceived this, they were greatly frightened, and when they also saw the army of Judas drawn up in the plain for battle, they all fled to the land of the Philistines. Then Judas returned to plunder the camp, and they seized much gold and silver and cloth dyed blue and sea purple and great riches. On their return they sang hymns and praises to heaven, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Thus Israel had a great deliverance that day.
Now, did you catch all of the miracles in that? There were 5,000 infantry, 1,000 hand-picked cavalry. These were the best of the best. Judas had 3,000, so 2 to 1. But I can pretty much tell you that the 3,000 men that Judas Maccabee had were not trained soldiers. They were people who were basically the militia of the day. Folks who came out with the Maccabees and were ready and willing to stand their ground, not because they were fighting for freedom, not because they were fighting, because God is on our side. They weren't fighting for right. They weren't fighting for anything other than. Did you remember what he said, right? Those who are zealous for the law and the covenant. They were fighting for the sacred word of our Creator, to maintain what he had said, to live the way our Creator designed them to live. That's what they're fighting for. And they had a tremendous victory over that particular section of the Greek army. Later, we're going to see that there were 42,000 in that army that these basically 3,000 to 4,000 men had to overcome. It is possible. It is possible, not because God was on their side, but because they happened to be on God's side. Now, that's only one of the many, many miracles that we see in reading the Maccabees. And like I said, it does. Now, the Maccabees, I probably need to say this, the only copies of it are in Greek that we know of. To my knowledge, in the last couple of years, there hadn't been any Hebrew manuscripts found of it. So that's why all these names are so hard to pronounce sometimes, because they're the Greek names, oftentimes of places that were in and around Israel. So they're named like the Greeks would have said it and spelled it, instead of the way the Hebrews would have, which makes them really hard to pronounce. So that's part of the problem. But even so, it's written in such a way that we recognize all of these things that happened that led up to the victory. And these victories didn't occur, as one overwhelming thing. The miracle that we see of the oil lasting for 8 days, that didn't happen. Or, we'd read about it earlier than after the fall of the temple second temple in Jerusalem. But think about that. What a distraction that has become from the real miracles that we see here. Judas taking his army, and standing there before the battle and saying the things he has said. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Why shouldn't we be afraid? Well, it's not a big deal. Remember what happened when our fathers were chased down to the Red Sea and Pharaoh's forces were behind them. It didn't, numbers didn't matter then. Overwhelming forces didn't matter then. Being trapped between a mountain range and a wide body of water didn't matter. Because when you're living the way you're designed to live, guess what happens? The Almighty Himself will protect you the way He chooses to protect you. Now, not every time are you going to have these miraculous things seemingly happen. Okay, there's going to be times when He decides, no, you said your what you needed to say, and now we're going to let them kill you because that's what I need to have happen. Right? For you Christians out there who are always, so want to be so bold about standing up for what you believe in, remember who was crucified, right? The things He said got Him killed. Because what was He speaking for? He wasn't speaking out just to love your neighbor. He was saying you've got to love God first. Because without that, you don't get anything else. When the Maccabees were in the, they thought they were winning, and some of the people were like, let's burn the camp, take what we need. Nope, you got to wait. There's time to come back. There'll be time to come back. Don't worry about getting your battle souvenirs right now. Let's go finish the job. Then we'll come back and take care of what's here. See, Judas understood what the instructions were from the Almighty. He got it. He understood it. Thursday, when we come back, we're going to look at another, what I think is a miracle. Some people might not think that, but I think it is. And then we're going to look at what history actually has to say about how Hanukkah was celebrated, how it came to be, because our history books, in my not so humble opinion, tell us a far greater story than our traditions and our legends. The miracles that happened because Judah Maccabee insisted that the people he led lived the way the Creator designed them to live. Now, if you want to witness some real miracles in your life, be able to do things maybe just as well, not heroic, but miraculous as Judas Maccabee, you can go to givegod90.com and you can figure out pretty quick, if you start with that first 30 days, how to repent, how to pray, how to start to improve and change your life and the lives of the people around you by doing nothing other than learning how to live the way your Creator designed you to live. So, did you have anything you wanted to add to all of that?
I hope everybody has a wonderful Hanukkah and a great week.
Absolutely. Don't miss Thursday, by the way, because, that's where we get into some really exciting, fun stuff. Until then, many, many blessings, everyone.